Being black in this university is strenuous. Being black in this university is very troublesome, and you feel it every day.
I'm not convinced that if black people owned Wits, that there would be much of a difference, right? And I think he's prioritizing color for superficial reasons, saying that we are uncomfortable because it appears that white people own it. Well, if it was black people, then what would be different?
There's a gross mismatch as to what you taught within the university space and the real world. So the university needs to transform, teach you what you need to know.
We should also push for our own powers as students so that people like Adam Habib do not have those kind of powers. He must be stripped of those kind of powers. No one individual can have so much power over so many people.
It's a very critical question, and I guess it means who has the autonomy and the hegemony over how the institution runs.
The issue in terms of like who owns Wits is a very essential one, because we can't deny the fact that sometimes when it comes to like basically the hierarchy or those who are in higher office, we can't deny that certain decisions in hand are called into like basically questionable reasons in why they would do so.
I feel if we had a policy or an environment that we felt comfortable that it was for us, we wouldn't be asking this question, because we would therefore be in a position to know that we are indeed in charge, because everything here is representing the students.
I have a problem with what he said, because it seems to me that he's prioritizing a superficial reason for why there's discomfort, that we're just looking at who owns it in terms of color, instead of what it is that we get from there, which would be more qualitative. I'm not convinced that if black people owned Wits, that there would be much of a difference, right? And I think he's prioritizing color for superficial reasons, saying that we are uncomfortable because it appears that white people own it. Well, if it was black people, then what would be different? We would what are we going to feel comfortable simply because they're people of color, or are there certain things that they would do that are substantive that would actually help us? I don't think he's addressed that, and I think his comment is a bit lopsided because of that.
It is important to look at the ownership of this university, because you then see whose interests are then pushed in the university. I think it is very important. It is not superficial at all.
She said that the issue, right, of who owns Wits is important because it implies the interests of a certain group of people. Again, I have to disagree, right? Because the implication here is that the interests of these people are not necessarily academic, right? That they are some sort of agenda that's hidden in some sort of purpose to subjugate. I would say that the interests of the people who run Wits are academic, and I have no reason to not see that.
Not necessarily looking at it only along racial lines. The people that own Wits, the people that run the institution, are a capitalist class, right? It's a political economy altogether. Let me give you an example with the res policy. So, like, the reason why you would have a res policy that prioritizes getting people, maybe white people, into the residences is so that you can actually have people who will prioritize paying, as opposed to having NSFAS kids who will default on payment, right? But the people that make the decision are not necessarily a bunch of white guys anyway. They're guys that are in the capitalist class in council. So we have to consider like the political economy that actually makes decisions that affect our lives on a daily basis. And looking at it only along racial lines is very superficial. You should look at the race and the class that comes with that as well.
I would imagine that the idea of a university, first of all, is so that people can be equipped to participate in an economy which is capitalist anyway. Well, at least in this case, it is majority for economic pursuits. That's what we come here for, to equip ourselves so that we can participate in the economy, right?
What I simply said is that for the fact that we are asking ourselves this question, it means the interests of the majority is not represented. And therefore we find ourselves asking ourselves that who is in charge and with what interest are they running the university? And the sad part that we see a university looking at student as a customer base, where they want to make profit, but they don't want us to actually self-actualize within this university. First, it begins with the curriculum. It begins with the policies that you cannot question whatever the management gives you. You are being victimized. Fair verdicts are taken upon you for asking questions that relate to your own self-actualization within this university. It's very sad that as an underworking class person, I cannot find full expression and comfort within an environment that is meant to be cosmopolitan.
This is not necessarily like a public institution that is benevolent and that ought to benefit all of us. There are profit interests that run the university as well. So when they give you, when they impose an increase that is over and above the agreed threshold, it's because they want to make up for profits they didn't make last year. And that decision, that policy decision, is at the expense of the majority of students who happen to be in the working class. So it is a business. Wits is a business. Wits is owned by a capitalist class, and it should be questioned altogether.
I am aware that there are universities around the world, like in Europe, that have free education, but I think there was a summation done in the media, right, that stated that in order for education to be free in South Africa, some ridiculous sum like 50 billion rand would need to come from somewhere, right? Where is it going to come from? So unfortunately, in the current circumstance, right, it would cripple this country, right, if we raised taxes to such a high level, right, in order to provide free education. We haven't yet reached the critical mass in order to be able to do that. So we must charge fees, right, that will attract people of skill to impart their knowledge on us.
Because part of a university is to question the way we're living, to question the way we're being educated, which means even if we live within capitalism, it doesn't mean you accept everything that you live within. So that for me alone, by his arguments, he's highlighting to all of us that he's saying the students, including himself, do not own the university.
To claim that I necessarily must own something to derive a benefit, that's a logical inconsistency. The conclusion doesn't follow.
Because it's okay to say that, for Dadas to say that, well, you get the quality education that you want, blah, 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 but he's ideologically is separating like that sort of quality from the real world issues, from like issues on the protection of females, from the protection of black people, and you can't do that because that's the one space in which we want to ensure some sort of change. When we progress outside of this system, it's one where we already have these ideologies entrenched to us to say that, oh well, there's this white capitalist that we can't do anything about. This type of change needs to happen in this space. That's the reason why we can't subscribe to these prescribed benefits that Dadas would have you believe are like the best things, because they isolate us from like real world situations where we need to address those problems to be able to enact some sort of change.
But I think so far what I've heard is that you are talking about Wits in an ahistorical manner, because I think you have to start back to who owns this land where Wits was built. And does the university that was built on that land benefit those people?
The black students that form the majority of this university will find themselves at a disadvantage, will find themselves owing 18,000 rand at the end of the year and have their marks frozen by a majority. And we can't take for granted that, again, 4,553 people dropped out last year in the middle of the year because of finances.
I mean, the students that are at Wits, majority of us don't even come from Gauteng, but we have buses going to Rosebank, no buses going into the inner city. Meanwhile, we want to tap into this and reclaim our city and our right to the city, but no one goes to the city. No one goes to Park Station, which is where we all go. When we go home, no one goes to the air. We need to start thinking of things that we actually need and put into context, and so that we're able to get things that actually matter for us as well.
Show me one white person in Esselen Res in Hillbrow. I've never seen it. I've never seen one white person. So, you know, we have to think about those things and what conditions are they at Hillbrow that are not there at Wits Junction. We have to take that into account. It's very important and it's not something that we must ignore.
Wits last year, according to the Wits annual report, was actually running at a loss. The amount of income which was coming into the university is less than the expenses which Wits needs to pay. That was the whole start of the reason why they didn't pay the workers, right? So when you already got an institution that's running at a loss, how do you then move forward to now, obviously, you know, you've got the competing interests now. You've got the university which wants to pay for all these grand ideas. You've got students who want all these grand ideas, but nobody really wants to pay for it, right? So that's the conundrum which happens.
So are we saying that as long as someone makes money out of us, it's fine, and our people should serve? Because it's very sad that each and every lecture, their child has a privilege to study with a subsidy or free, but the cleaner here cannot even access the toilet. So what inequality are we addressing? Are we then not saying that let the rich get richer, let the developed get more developed? I mean, it should be the other way around, that if you can afford, then you should pay. Those who can't afford should come for free, and then we'll be addressing inequality.
I just want to move a bit away from it being a race issue to being a legislative issue, because we didn't know when the EFF was suspended that Habib has those powers to suspend those students, right? So the Constitution and the Wits statutes affords him those powers. So in as much as we might assume that it's them against black people or white people against black people, it's also about the legislature that governs the university at the end of the day. So I think it's more of us knowing what is the law that Wits works under, then we can flourish.
What is it that we can do? You know, in the sense that if we do have our own constitution, yes, the Wits has their own constitution, and my brother said that you know, the constitution of our country supersedes the constitution of Wits, then I think the best solution, if it comes to the legislative point, we should use what we have in terms of our own constitution, you know, because we saw what they did to the EFF, and yet the constitution came into our power. You know, so there's another point we should also look at, and as well, we should also push for our own powers as students, so that people like Adam Habib do not have those kind of powers. He must be stripped of those kind of powers. No one individual can have so much power over so many people.
I actually like the point that Mfumo raised about the whole idea of legislature, because I feel like it supplements, you know, the power that these people have, and they rest upon, like, whatever they do, they rest it upon this legislation which is in book and needs to be followed. But the fundamental problem I have with Mfumo's solution, which sort of highlights Tammy's idea of institutional autonomy, is in us knowing this legislature and the rules and policies, right? It does not actually change anything, right? And what we actually need to ask ourselves today is that, how can you bring about effective, logical, and plausible changes to this legislation, right? Which can sort of keep this university afloat, because of all the solutions that have been brought thus far, Madam Speaker, right? There are two extremes. The university can fall or it can rise, right? Starving the university might make it close down. Do we benefit from this? This is what we need to ask ourselves.
The university is not doing sufficient to help us as black people. There's so much they could do, but instead we are threatened with interdicts and so forth when we're trying to get our voices heard. And you know what, in order for one to understand the plight of students, you have to come to ground and not sit on the 11th floor and drink your fancy tea from expensive machines. You have to listen to the students, because if we were not here, then they wouldn't be here.
You are telling us about council. We never meet council. Even Habib himself, you never meet him. You see him by chance. When they found Homo what on TV, he's there. But when look, I'm going to give practical examples. How do you have a town hall meeting of 45 minutes and you say you want to hear what the students are saying for 45 minutes?
Secondly, Adam Habib will freely tell you he's a puppet, and he'll tell you he's a puppet of council. So the question then is, what is council? Well, council is 30 members which are elected to basically run the institution, 2 of which are elected by the donors, who are, the companies. It's, I don't know, one guy's the CEO of Discovery, and then it's a girl who's, I'm not sure, right? The majority of the rest of it is elected either by convocation, which is the staff, by council itself, or by the government. In fact, 4 of the seats are directly done by government. So really, when you're asking who is running the country, who is running Wits, well, it's the same people running the country, right? And that's why when you come and you say, well, why don't we have some communist socialist elements inside, what is a capitalist regime? The issue is because the entire country is basically run the same way that Wits is. So I'm not really, I'm not saying it's good, it's not. But I'm not really sure why people are surprised by that. We've got to change the entire country as well as changing Wits. Like, you can't try and change one without changing the other, because that is the framework in which this operates.
What's the purpose of this debate? Because for me, this sounds like a church, like where people are here to manifest, and like it's a sort of a therapeutic session. Because these things are known already. You know them. What are you doing with those things? Because you are busy. What's the purpose of doing that? You know these things already. Do we have to? 21 years. Do we still have to speak about these things when these things are clear and obvious?
The most important question that I want to ask now is that, in as much as we speak about transformation, decolonization, and we ask ourselves these questions, what are we trying to achieve? Are we just trying to replace the current agents of this hegemony with others? Or are we trying to destabilize the entire system in itself and rebuild the new one? Because the notion of transformation seems to be an opportunistic struggle in such a way that we see other black people wanting to tap into the very same hegemony that we have a problem with.
I'd like to address the gentleman who said we all love Wits and we want to keep it that way. And I'll address that by quoting Fanon. He says we need to end this world and the world as we know it, right? So I feel like what we actually need to do is to deconstruct this university. We're not trying to keep it as it is and replace the current council, like Kafente was saying, with other people. But what we actually want to do is to rip down the system as it is and make our own out of that. Because with the current system, if we just transform the system instead of decolonizing it, it's not going to get us far. We'll just have temporary victory, which will then result in anger 20 years down the line, like for instance where we are right now. It was because we tried to transform the system and assimilate into the system instead of decolonizing it from the very first time. Yeah.
The reason for me is that we need to go beyond Habib. It's not him. The problem is the system that actually gives Habib the powers that is used. So even if we were to call for another one, when it was Loiso, we thought Loiso was the problem. He's gone, the problem still remains. Now he's Habib. Even if he goes, we're not going to solve anything without disrupting the system that is there. And how do we do that? This is not a Wits issue only. And the question that we should frame actually should be, who must own universities? Not who owns Wits. Because even if you were to do it and you try to collapse the system within Wits, you are not going to have a nationally accepted, mobilized mass. You need to actually regroup and actually say who should own universities and what systems should actually run universities. Because we should run away from this system of border thinking, that we should concentrate on solving issues at Wits and we forget about UJ. But if we mobilize and say who must, let us collapse all the borders that actually screen us and separate us, we should actually be a national mass that actually goes around it. Even if it is 2 students, we should actually start it. It's fine. Yes. But let it spread to all universities. Because it is pointless to get systems in place at VETS when UJ is actually suffering from the westernized kind of a system. It should be all, because you will not get a space at VETS, but you need to also have the liberty of saying, I didn't get it there, but let me have a chance of going to UJ, because the system is actually now liberating. And we should actually also understand what decolonization, seeks to do. Decolonization is actually a liberation for everybody. It doesn't liberate a certain race. It actually says it should be on equal footing for everyone. So those are the kind of thinking that we should actually be exploring.
Feel that there's a dichotomy? Do you feel there's the government and the capitalist, or do you feel the two are one and the same thing?
Theoretically, there is, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like theory can somewhat be integrated by majority into practicality. But right now, we feel that the government is as good as inefficient and as good as zero in the state that Wits is at today in terms of who runs it.
Instance of capitalism and blaming the government is actually not helping the debate. The debate, it should be focused on the students. What is your responsibility as a student in this university? Because I read history, governments never changed anything, never changed society. The people on the ground are the ones who have the agency to change society. Everyone, if you can ask everyone who's here, maybe not me, but everyone, you'll find that these people want to be rich. They want to be accepted into white hegemony and be rich. So you can't ask people who owns Wits and like they'll be focusing on governments and capitalism, things that are useless. What are you doing yourself as a student? What's your responsibility towards society?
I feel like by putting the government into this, we are giving away our power. We do have power as people. I do accept that our government is shitty and they're not doing the best that they can do. But hey, they're human beings. I can't say if I was there, I wouldn't also get corrupt. But I don't know. That's what I'm saying. These people are humans. We can't expect them to be Jesus and come and save us. I have power within my own little space. I can do something.
How do people die in Marikana and the country continues like nothing has happened? When people have died, black people, how do you still have a massacre in democracy and the country continues like nothing is happening? Up to today, no one is held accountable.
I just want to say to Kifense, he says that people have died to get us where we are. We all acknowledge that, but people still die in a deracialized regime that is owned by your parent party, right? Marikana is an example. When Zuma whitewashes the report and says they're not to blame, and if you want to blame Lonmin, then tell the ANC to stop partnering up with Lonmin to harm people on the ground. People die every day because of inhumane living situations. People die every day because of life experiences, because of a system. And all the people that you support and people that stand by you are people that perpetuate those systems.
And so far what we get is politics has failed, a revolution is unlikely because of buy-in. The question still lies, are there other avenues that we can change some of these injustices that we identify that exist within the system?
So I propose that we use our energy efficiently. So we take the energy that is expended, and I think is actually wasteful, right? In having these violent, aggressive protests like pepper flinging, which actually perpetuate stereotypes of black people being anarchists, right? So we can take that energy, right, and vigor and put it into our books, right? So that we get the degrees, right? So that we can become the councils that we want to see, so that we can replace the evil council, right, and be those people, and we can change it from the inside. So how about we do that just instead? By pursuing and actually complying by the laws, right? You get your degree, and then you can change the system from the inside, which will then ultimately filter down into everybody. How about we do that? I think that's the most rational way.
We understand that legislation is very important, and that's what gives people power. But if you notice of any struggle that's happened, no one's won a struggle by following the law. 76 would not have happened if they had tried to picket, tried to work within the apartheid laws. The problem we have, as I forgot his name, I think it's Kifense, who said that, what are we trying to do? what we're trying to do is to stabilize the system, because the system is the one that gives Habib the power that we seem not to be happy with. So in order to stabilize the system, you don't follow the laws. You don't try to go inside the system, because whoever goes inside the system becomes corrupted by that system. The system is bigger than any individual that goes within the system. So my point is, don't try to follow the law. Don't try to change the law. Deconstruct it.
And it's very sad to see another anti-black people who are black thinking that just because their fathers got the privileges of BEE, they can therefore think that they are better than us. So the first thing as students were calling to other students who think being apolitical is a fashionable thing, to come back to their minds and look at the struggles of black people, because we are not here for ourselves. We are here for those who are coming to us.
I actually resent the comments that have come out here, right? And I'm actually quite shocked that at an intellectual institution, right, that has the prestige that Wits does, right, there are people, right, who are threatened by objectivity, right? I am bringing an objective perspective, right, into this debate that is threatened by dogma and confirmation bias, right? So I am receiving these personal attacks, right, that have no basis in intellectual anything. They are intellectually bankrupt, right? If you are threatened by objectivity, right, I suggest that you enroll at your local church or synagogue or dogma, right? Or mosque, because that is where you can have your dogmatic views supported.
I just find it problematic how generally we've come to depict black people as being homogenous, as just wanting the same thing. But the reality is black people don't want the same things. We want different things. We need to be realistic to what black people want specifically. Because it's great that we want the current generation to be like the class of 76 and say, well, fight for your rights and fight for freedom. But we're not the same. We want different things. And because of that, we cannot then paint other black people who want those different things as not being black enough or as not wanting to advance black people. I think that you need to have some sort of objective stance in ensuring that even though you want to ensure that black people are protected, black people are being granted some sort of opportunities, you don't paint those ones who have different objectives and different interests as not being black enough, because that's particularly problematic.
It speaks to a bigger picture of actually who holds the power in this university, because fine, I concede that there's no homogeny in black people, but you find that if you speak to students, the student that is choosing to be apolitical or apathetic, not because they do not have the same struggles as the child who is political, but because of the nature of this university and what it does, and when it bullies children or students at this university and makes them feel like they cannot protest because they're going to be putting their degrees on the line. That's what we find.
Or as students, we don't really care, guys, at the end of the day. We get here and we say, let's be radical, let's go poo in the lips, let's go do things. But once we leave this venue, it's like, hey, I've got an assignment to do, I've got a submission to do, I've got a test to write for. So at the end of the day, that radical approach that we want and that we say so nicely in this kind of talks, that let's guys, we'll do it, we'll go be radical. At the end of the day, we want to do it because when you go home, your mother won't ask you why you put to the toilet or what were you doing in the lift. Your mother will ask you, where's your degree? Where did that 90,000 go at the end of the day?
You can't force people to be political. But for the fact that we are sitting here, it means there's something that is politically wrong. And these people are using politics against us. And the only way to get to them is to use politics. When you mobilize people, under which banner you do it, you're going to need politics. You cannot say I'm apolitical in a space where everything is politically wrong. It doesn't make sense. It means you must be political in order to realize the flaws within the political instability thereof.
The people in this room, we are responsible for one thing. We're responsible for conscientizing students on the ground about the issues that actually affect them. Because students might not know that, you know, of the systematic ills that really make them struggle until you let them know, right? Sometimes it takes you telling a student that there exists something like a food bank, or there are students that sleep in libraries, right? And who are hungry in class and take a shower in the gym in the morning and sit right next to you in the lecture. Sometimes it takes you telling that student that thing so to rally them forward, right? So it's up to all of us in this room to actually conscientize people towards like achieving certain ends in like, you know, that we want to achieve in the end. And that's really how you garner the critical mass that you ought to achieve.
As much as, you know, we're sitting here and we feel like it's the minority, but I think that people are slowly getting conscientized, you know, in some way or another, slowly but surely, and something will happen, and yeah, people must be ready for that.
While it's nice for all of us here to sit in this room and say, no, the way Wits is run is a problem, it needs to change. The way, you know, who owns Wits is an issue, we need to be radical and change it, right? It's very nice to say all that, but you forget that us here in the room, regardless of race, class, what have you, we're the minority on this campus. 23% of the student population voted in the last SRC elections. So less than a quarter of students actually care about the politics on this campus, right? So what that then says to me, and what I see in my everyday experience, and I'm sure a lot of you guys see, is that students don't care. For the majority of students, right, it doesn't actually affect them. You know, well, it affects them, but they don't really care that it affects them, right? And therefore, trying to say, well, we must go against the system, you know, don't try to conform to the laws, we must go against the laws. That works very well if you're the majority. But when your sentiment is the minority just says no. And like, that's it. And Habib can use that to his advantage. He can come to you and you can say, only 23% of the students elected your SRC, it's illegitimate, I don't have to give a shit what they say. And that's pretty much what he does. So we've got to remember that we need to first garner support within our own student body. And then, once we have that support, move on to changing the system.
Even amongst the students who supposedly care, the reason why we don't necessarily come to a consensus as to what solution we're going to take is because we all run back to our political affiliations. So the reason why, let's say perhaps, you know, the issue is curriculum reform. The reason why we can't find a consensus as to how that ought to be done is because we're looking for the next political victory for SRC elections. That's another thing that's really, really stifling us as a Wits students community.
So I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that Kifense can't expect students to be political because politics has failed us, and that's a reality. The people that appoint Council Kifense are all from the ANC, right? That's the ruling party that is supposed to be fighting for transformation, and they don't do that. They appoint Jewish people like Josh Brumberg's father, the richest man in the country, and they allow them to override the majority's needs. So you can't tell me it's disgusting to be apolitical when every political party that's available has failed all of us, right? So, for example, the AFF might say they stand for bringing back the land, but you don't steal money and justify morality behind it by paying it back later. The fact that you stole it means a lot of people have suffered. So one, politics has failed us, and you can't expect us to identify with any political party, not the PYA, not the EFF, because all of you have failed us, right? Why? Because of elitism. You guys fight when you're on the ground, when you get into the office. What you stand for is for your own personal needs, your own individual interests, and that's disgusting.
One of the reasons Rhodes Must Fall was so successful is that the UCT students were able to pinpoint a problem and they were able to follow up on that. Our biggest problem with the Wits is that we do have a lot of issues, and we throw words like we need transformation, but some the apathetic or non-political students will ask, like, what transformation are you talking about? What exactly must we transform? And that's exactly what we need to pinpoint. If you're speaking from a conscientized position, you need to be able to tell someone what the problem is specifically in order for them to relate to that problem and in order for them to want to fix that problem.
what made Rhodes Must Fall successful was the symbolic galvanizing tool that was the statue. Because the statue ended up not being a conversation about Rhodes himself, but it ended up being a conversation about the transformation agenda altogether. So they ended up having a conversation about finances, ended up having a conversation about curriculum change, ended up having a conversation about institutional naming, and all of those things at the same time. But they needed something symbolic in order to garner students to to be conscious about those issues. So maybe we need the same thing as Wits University, because we are just as, I guess, cosmopolitan and diverse as UCT is. We also have a plurality of problems with regards to transformation as well. Maybe all we need then is a symbolic figure, right, that must fall.
We speak about Adam Habib all the time. We feel he is an agent of whiteness. He is one of the owners, in his little own way, of the university. I do not know whether his actions are as a direct result of what he thinks or whether he's a puppet for someone else. Either way, what he has put forward to me as a student is not in my best interest as a black person, and I'll say it, it's true. I also feel I need to say that race is inseparable to any other issue. When we look at class, race is inseparable. It's inseparable. We cannot separate these things, and we should not be afraid to say black and white, because it's the truth.
Because even within the country in itself, when you are calling for economic freedom, we find ourselves between two contradictions. First being the class, and then secondly the race contradiction. And it comes as a form of historical margins, that it is not a surprise that the upper working class would be white people. And by mere fact that that thing came as a form of marginalizing another race, we can never, therefore, be ignorant to the fact that this is a race struggle at the end of the day. Being black in this university is strenuous. Being black in this university is very troublesome, and you feel it every day. When you look at your script and you look at the script of a white person, you feel it. When you're advocating for students to come, you will never see a white person striking for NFSAS. Never. Never. In as much as they may act like they are sympathizing and they understand, but you'll never find a white person fighting for the workers.
Solutions or ways to go forward. I think, firstly, we need to know what we're dealing with. We need to know that we are under attack. Maybe not with guns and knives, but this is an attack as black people. It's an attack. And we cannot sugarcoat and see it as something else, because that is what it is. The way you want to interpret that, you're free. I think we need to know who the enemy is and who they're against.
Another thing that I just want to touch on also is, I guess, the institutional autonomy that universities actually own. I think the reason why, part of the reason why the institutional culture of the university is the way that it is, right, that the curriculum is not set, to benefit African people, or that the fact that student hunger exists and the food bank isn't funded at all by the university, is precisely because the varsity has its own institutional autonomy. The government has no say in how the university is run, right? That's why in Stellenbosch, to this day, Afrikaans lectures exist, is precisely because of institutional autonomy. So I think also that's another thing we should consider. How do we tackle this notion of institutional autonomy? Because that seems to be one of the things that hinder progress for students that are catered in the university.
There's a gross mismatch as to what you taught within the university space and the real world. And that's a reality of it, which you will not be able to cope when you go out there So the university needs to transform, teach you what you need to know.
I think from this debate, what we've realized is that how the fact that we don't own this university has affected our interests as students, so our curriculum, whether or not students are being fed in this university. So it is very important for us students to take back this university because it does belong to us.
We will not allow pieces of papers that claim to qualify 1% of the knowledge we contain to stop us from winning this revolution. Bear in mind, a degree only says that you are qualified for this particular knowledge. It doesn't cover the entire knowledge that you have. And you are proud as a black person to say, I am the elite, while you are still being conscientized by your oppressors. I close with the sentiments of Malcolm X. He says, only a fool would allow the enemy to teach his children. Thank you.
Just in closing, I'd just like to say thank you for coming today and thank you for coming throughout the week. It's in spaces like these where conscientization happens. It's in spaces like these where views are changed. It's in spaces like these when views are changed, we're pushed to become uncomfortable, we're pushed to try and enact change. And it's in spaces like this where we're reminded to never tire in always seeking truth, to never tire in always seeking ways to have justice within society.